At my baby's first day of preschool, my mother said, "Let's hope she's not as slow as you were." My daughter came back with a drawing that said, "My mom is my hero." She never saw it. "Do you ever think she's like you?" My mom asked casually as we stood outside Ruby's preschool. "Let's hope she's not as slow as you were." I didn't reply. Ruby, my daughter, had been gripping my hand tightly, her little backpack bouncing as she skipped inside for her very first day of school. Hours later, she ran to me with a crumpled drawing and said, "I drew you. You're my hero." That night, I tucked it away, where my mother would never see it. She never deserved to. When I was little, I didn't understand what was wrong with the way my mother loved me. She did all the basic meals, clothes, school pickups, but always with this layer of bitterness underneath. She was never physically abusive, but she had a weapon more subtle and permanent: words. Her voice could turn cold faster than a slammed door in January. She knew how to take pride and squeeze the life out of it. When I got a B+ in math, she asked, "And what kept you from getting an A?" When I made the varsity swim team, she said, "Hopefully you don't choke at meets like you did at regionals last year." I was Ray. The awkward girl with frizzy hair, who took longer than others to read, longer to tie her shoes, and longer to find her voice. My father, Russell, was around in body but not in presence. He worked 12-hour shifts at the post office and came home to his recliner and the TV. Conversations with him rarely went beyond "How was school?" or "Hand me the remote." So it was me and Joyce, my mother. Her love was never gentle. It came with reminders of how hard she worked, how little I understood, how lucky I was to have a roof over my head. I left at 18. That wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no slamming doors. I packed my things into 2 suitcases and got on a bus to Philadelphia to attend Temple University. I picked a major in social work, not because it was practical, but because I wanted to be the kind of adult I never had. The first time I met Daryl, I was 23 and trying to juggle classes and 2 part-time jobs. He was taking a continuing ed class on nonprofit management. Tall, soft-spoken, deliberate. He didn't try to impress me. He just listened. Daryl and I married when I was 26. He was solid, reliable. He liked routines. Sunday grocery shopping, Friday pizza nights, daily walks after dinner. For a while, I found that comforting. But slowly, the silence between us got heavier. By the time I was 30, Ruby was 2, and I had just found out about his affair with a coworker. The discovery wasn't cinematic. No lipstick on collars. Just his laptop left open and her name in his inbox too many times, always around 11 p.m., with photos and plans. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I packed 2 suitcases again and took Ruby with me. We moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the Fairmount neighborhood, close to the agency where I worked. Rent was tight, furniture was secondhand, but it was ours. Ruby had her own bed. I had a door I could close. She was a bright little thing. Always humming, always talking to herself. I'd catch her arranging her toys like little communities, some in charge, some taking care of others. I never had to teach her empathy. She was born with it. I promised myself I'd never talk to her the way Joyce talked to me. For the most part, I kept that promise. Even on days I was too tired to cook, when she threw her dinner on the floor or melted down in the grocery store, I bit back the urge to shame her. I just got on her level, looked into her eyes, and said things like, "I see you're upset. I'm here." It sounds silly, doesn't it? But it worked. By the time Ruby was 4, I was working full-time again. Preschool was the next step. She was excited to make new friends, wear her tiny rainbow backpack, and show off her light-up sneakers. Then, my mother called. Out of the blue. "I heard Ruby's starting school," she said. "I'd like to come visit. Be there for her first day." We hadn't spoken in months. Maybe a year. Our contact had grown sporadic, her calls coming more from obligation than affection. But something in me thought, maybe she's changed. Maybe seeing Ruby would soften her. She arrived the night before school started. Same stiff posture, same heavily done hair, same perfume I remembered from childhood. She offered to cook dinner and criticized the pan I gave her. She asked Ruby what book she liked, then said, "That one's too childish." She called the apartment cozy with a tight-lipped smile. The next morning, we all got dressed. Ruby wore her favorite dress with cats on it. I packed her lunch, made her a note shaped like a heart, and tucked it into her lunchbox. My mother watched, arms folded. As we were getting in the car, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever wonder if she's like you were?" Then, like it was the most harmless joke in the world, "Let's hope she's not as slow." I didn't say anything. I think I just stood there, stunned. The way that one sentence swept decades back into my chest. The way she could say it so effortlessly. Ruby didn't notice. She was too excited, bouncing in her booster seat, asking what her teacher's name would be. I forced a smile. My hand shook a little on the steering wheel. At pickup, Ruby came running with a crumpled drawing in her hand. "Look, Mama. It's you. You're my hero." The drawing had her usual scribbles, her, me, a big red cape trailing from my shoulders. Above, in shaky 4-year-old handwriting, "My mom is my hero." I didn't cry until we got home. My mother was waiting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like she'd always belonged there. I put the drawing on the counter, next to the mail. She glanced at it. "Messy," she muttered. "But cute." That was it. That night, when Ruby was asleep, I folded the drawing and placed it inside a shoebox with her baby things. I didn't want my mother to ever lay eyes on it again. Because that drawing wasn't for her. It was mine. The next few days were tight with tension, the kind you can't quite name out loud, but feel in your chest like humidity before a storm. My mother lingered around the apartment like a houseguest with no checkout date. She said she wanted to help, but her version of helping meant commenting on how late I let Ruby stay up, how I needed firmer discipline, how my job was emotionally draining and no good for a single mother. "It's not about you anymore, Ray," she said over breakfast one morning while watching Ruby slowly butter a piece of toast. "You had your time to be lost. Now you need to shape up for her." I said nothing. I'd learned it was less exhausting to let her believe she was right. Ruby was too young to see the layers in these conversations. She saw her grandmother as a well-dressed lady who gave her peppermint candies and complimented her crayon drawings. But I watched. And listened. Because my mother's kindness always came with an edge. Like when Ruby asked for help tying her shoelaces and my mother said, "You really don't know how yet." Not cruel. Not loud. But enough. Always just enough. What surprised me most was how quickly I started to shrink again. It had been years since I'd felt small in my own home. But in just a week, I found myself second-guessing everything. Should I be stricter with Ruby? Was my job too much? Was I really still, somehow, the slow girl from Harrisburg who never quite got it right? Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I came home from work early. The preschool had closed early due to a burst pipe, and I had to bring Ruby home mid-shift. When we walked in, Ruby holding my hand and skipping over puddles in the entryway, I heard my mother's voice in the living room. She was on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop on her voice. "No, I'm only here because I have to be," she said. "Ray's doing her best, I guess, but you know how she is always a little off. It's no wonder Daryl didn't stay." I felt Ruby's hand twitch in mine. She didn't understand all the words, but the tone said enough. I opened the door fully. My mother froze. Ruby looked up at me, wide-eyed, sensing that something had happened. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked over, took the phone from her hand, and ended the call. "We're done," I said. She blinked, like she couldn't understand what that meant. "You don't get to do this here," I said. My voice was low. Cold. Steady. Not in front of her. not anymore. You're overreacting, she said, smoothing the hem of her cardigan. This is why you struggle when you're too emotional. Always have been. But something had shifted in me. It was like all the years of swallowing words finally hardened into a kind of armor. I'm emotional because I care, I said. And that makes me a better mother than you ever were. She left that night. Not with a suitcase, because she never fully unpacked. She just put on her coat, muttered something about being ungrateful, and let the door close behind her. Ruby asked me, "Is Grandma mad?" I took a breath. No, baby. She just had to go back to her house. Ruby nodded, already distracted by a stuffed animal she'd left on the couch. That's the thing about kids, they understand only what they need to. That night, after Ruby fell asleep, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the shoebox full of her little treasures. Drawings. Old pacifiers. A tiny pair of rainbow socks I couldn't bear to throw away. I unfolded the drawing again. My mom is my hero and ran my finger along the outline of the red cape. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired. Lonely. Frustrated. But I also felt something else. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. Inside was a single-page letter. "Ray, I suppose I made mistakes. I never wanted you to feel unloved, even if I didn't know how to show it. You were always different, and I didn't understand how to handle that. I see now you've built something good. Better than what I gave you. I won't come back unless invited." Mom, I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in the same shoebox beside the drawing. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw the letter away either. Some silences aren't meant to be broken. But they can be acknowledged. The letter sat in the shoebox for weeks, untouched, but not forgotten. Some nights, after Ruby had gone to sleep and the dishes were done, I'd find myself sitting on the edge of my bed, holding it again. Not reading it, just holding it. Feeling its weight. Wondering if it was guilt or control. Wondering if my mother meant any of it, or if the letter was just another way to keep herself present in a place she no longer belonged. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not even Mila, my best friend from work, the only person who really knew the depth of my history with my mother. Mila and I had bonded during a late shift at the agency, while sorting through intakes and talking about our childhoods like two survivors trading stories. She'd grown up with a father who disappeared when she was 12. We understood the kind of quiet trauma that shapes how you move through the world. She had warned me, gently but firmly, when I told her my mother was visiting. "She doesn't change," she'd said. "Not unless she wants to. And it doesn't sound like she wants to." She was right. But even knowing that, something in me couldn't fully cut the cord. I didn't call. I didn't invite her back. But her voice still lingered in my head, sometimes little echoes when I packed Ruby's lunches or hesitated before correcting her on something small. "You let her walk all over you," my mother would say. Or, "That's not how a real parent does things." The truth is, I had spent most of my life reacting to my mother, whether by defying her, resenting her, or trying to prove her wrong. I had never learned what it meant to just be without her in the background, judging every move I made. One Saturday morning, about a month after she left, I took Ruby to the farmer's market down by 22nd and Fairmount. It had become our little ritual: handmade donuts, fresh berries, a stop at the flower stall where she always insisted on picking one sad flower that looked like it needed extra love. That morning, she picked a small drooping marigold, cradling it in both hands like it was made of glass. "Why this one?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It looked lonely," she said. "But it's still pretty." I smiled, but something in me twisted a little. I couldn't help but think of my mother. And the part of me was the daughter part that still wanted something from her. Closure, maybe. Or a different kind of love. Or just understanding. Later that week, I started having dreams about her. Not nightmares, not memories. Just strange, quiet dreams where she was standing at the kitchen sink, humming a song I didn't recognize, or brushing Ruby's hair while I watched silently from the doorway. I'd wake up unsettled. I didn't miss her. Not exactly. But I missed the idea of what she should have been. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside a bookstore near Rittenhouse Square, staring at a display of greeting cards. There was one that read, "For the mother you want to thank, even if you're still figuring out how." I didn't buy it. I wasn't ready for that. But I did walk home slower than usual, thinking about all the women I'd met through my work clients, mothers, daughters, caretakers who carried similar wounds. Who kept waiting for an apology, a gesture, a sign that the person who hurt them might someday understand. Sometimes, I would sit in the small therapy groups I facilitated and hear a woman say, "I just don't want to become my mother," and feel it like a jolt in my chest. I knew that fear intimately. One night, after a particularly long day, Ruby curled up next to me on the couch while I was answering emails. She wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "You don't go away like other people." I paused, set my laptop aside, and looked down at her. "What do you mean, baby?" She shrugged, resting her chin on my knee. "You always come back. Even when I make a mess. Even when you're mad." I wrapped my arms around her and whispered, "That's my job. To always come back." But later, when she was asleep and I was cleaning up the living room, I realized that coming back wasn't something I had ever felt growing up. My mother was always there in the physical sense, but she never returned emotionally. She never met me where I was. And I was starting to understand something else, too, how deeply I had internalized that absence. How even now, with Ruby thriving, with our little home filled with warmth and softness and art taped to the walls, I still sometimes feared I wasn't enough. That my love didn't count unless it looked perfect. That I'd somehow fall short, just as my mother always implied I would. But Ruby didn't see any of that. To her, I was solid ground. A safe landing place. She didn't need me to be perfect, she just needed me to stay. That weekend, I opened the shoebox again. This time, I took out the letter and read it all the way through. Not because I was looking for healing, but because I wanted to understand the version of my mother that wrote it. There was a line I hadn't noticed before, likely skimmed in my anger the first time. "You were always different. I didn't know how to mother someone like you." That sentence hit me in a way I didn't expect. She didn't say she didn't want to. She said she didn't know how. And that difference, however small, felt like the tiniest crack in a wall I had spent my whole life pushing against. I still didn't want her in my life. I still didn't believe she had truly changed. But I could feel the anger softening into something else. Not forgiveness, but maybe understanding. A kind of surrender, not to her, but to reality. I couldn't go back and rewrite the childhood I didn't have. But I could keep writing the one Ruby was getting. A few more months passed. Spring melted into summer, and life settled into a rhythm again. Ruby graduated from preschool in a tiny ceremony full of juice boxes and pipe cleaner crowns. She made me a diploma that read, "Best Mommy in the World," with extra hugs. My shoebox of keepsakes grew fatter by the week. I had moved on from the letter. Not forgetting it, but placing it in its rightful place, past tense. Then, in early August, my mother called again. I let it ring the first time. And the second. But the third time, I picked up. "I was wondering," she began, voice as composed and clipped as ever, "if I might come visit. Just for a weekend. I'd like to give Ruby her birthday gift in person." My stomach tightened. Not with fear this time, but with clarity. "No," I said calmly. Silence. Then, "Excuse me?" I said no, I repeated. "Ruby's birthday isn't a social opportunity for you. You don't get to parachute in and out whenever it's convenient, especially not after the things you said." "I sent that letter," she said sharply, like it was a trophy. "I acknowledge my mistakes." "You listed them," I said. "That's not the same as owning them." More silence. She wasn't used to me being this direct. I'm not trying to fight, she said after a long pause. I'm not fighting either. I'm just done playing the role you wrote for me. Then I added, you don't know Ruby. You never took the time to. And honestly, I don't think she even remembers you much. That part was true. Since she left, Ruby hadn't asked about her once. Don't be cruel, Ray, she snapped. I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. And you taught me that honesty matters more than kindness, remember? Click. I sat there for a minute, staring at the call-ended screen. Then I smiled. Not because I had hurt her but because I hadn't needed to. That was the real power. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't folded. I hadn't explained myself beyond what was necessary. I had just closed the door. And that was enough. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Thick. Expensive paper. Inside was a birthday card for Ruby and a check for $1,000. Ruby, of course, was too young to understand. She sent me money? I said to myself, a bitter laugh slipping out. I didn't cash it. Instead, I mailed it back in a plain envelope with a single note, this isn't the kind of gift Ruby needs. What she needs is to be protected from the kind of love that confuses her. And that was that. But fate or perhaps poetic timing had one last thread to tie off. Later that fall, I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment seminar in Harrisburg. Someone from the agency had passed my name along. They were looking for working mothers who had overcome difficult backgrounds to talk about resilience and parenting. The moment I saw the address, my heart stuttered. The event was being held at the local community center. The same place where I'd taken swim lessons as a child. Just 2 blocks from the house I grew up in. I almost declined. But then I thought of Ruby. Of that drawing. Of the words my mom is my hero. So I accepted. The day of the seminar, I stood in front of a modest crowd of women, some young, some older, some who looked like they hadn't heard a kind word in weeks, and I told my story. I didn't name names. But I told them about a mother who confused criticism for guidance. About the long shadow that casts over a child. About reclaiming your voice, even when it trembles. And about how I had chosen to raise my daughter with gentleness instead of judgment. When it was over, people clapped. Some nodded. A few cried. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was about my mother's age. Her voice shook as she said, I think I was the kind of mother you described. I never knew how much harm I did until my daughter stopped calling me. Hearing you today. I think I finally understand. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. Not because I forgave my own mother, but because this woman was trying in a way mine never had. On my way out, I took a small detour. I drove past the old red brick house. The shutters had been replaced. The yard was trimmed. There was a swing set out front now, and a different name on the mailbox. It didn't belong to me anymore. It never really had. Back in Philadelphia, I kept building the life I'd chosen. I finished my master's degree. I started a community parenting group for women leaving abusive homes. Ruby started kindergarten with a tooth missing and a new obsession with planets. And on her 6th birthday, she handed me a new drawing. This one had us both in capes. Side by side. I asked her, why are you wearing a cape this time too? She grinned, missing tooth and all. Because heroes make other heroes. It was at that moment that I realized what real revenge looks like. It's not yelling. It's not a confrontation. It's breaking the chain. It's giving your child the childhood you never had. It's living your life so fully, so authentically, that it turns every insult, every wound, every ounce of doubt you were fed into a fuel they'll never understand. My mother never saw that drawing either. But I did. And that was more than enough.